we are talking about network configuration assistance, a utility which helps us in configuring, reconfiguring and managing listeners on Oracle. I am logged in as Oracle user on my system, and to start the utility the command is netca. When you start netca, this is Oracle Net Services Configuration Assistance. So you see the screenshots here: listener configuration, naming methods, local net service name configuration and directory uses. So let's continue with the listener configuration. Here you see we have the option of add, reconfigure, delete, rename. For example, let's delete one listener. So select the listener which you want to delete. I have two listeners. I'm deleting listener 1. Next, yes, and listener is deleted. Next, again. Now listener configuration, we are going to add one listener now. So next, you see the options: add, listener 1 or listener 2. Let's say I'm going to add listener 2. Next, which protocol this listener is going to handle. You can configure the listener to accept connections over one or more protocols. Select the protocols you want to configure for this listener, right? So on which port you want this listener to listen to. Port number 1521, which is a standard default, or you want to use a specific other port. Let's say port number 1522. You specify the port number. You want to configure another listener? No. You click on next and your listener is ready to start. Select the listener you want to start. Click on next and you see the command is also displayed at the back end. The listener is started. So next, we have done the listener configuration. Same way, next is naming methods. Click on this. You will see different naming methods are there. What these naming methods are, we are going to talk about that in detail, but right now only the screenshot, like easy connect string, local naming. What these easy connect and what local namings are, basically they are specified in the connection string. How you can connect to your Oracle, you can connect or authenticate. Right word is authenticate. You can authenticate using local, complete string, or directory naming. Directory means LDAP directory, LDAP server, which we learned in RHCE. NIS based network information system, right? And then next, naming method complete. Similarly, local net service name configuration, quite simple. You just identify, add, reconfigure, delete, rename, test. Let's say reconfigure. Select the Oracle PDB which you configured, right? Or you want to add new one, you select that and specify the service name. Service name is your SID of your database, like ORCL PDB is for our case. We created that, right? ORCL PDB is the service name. So specify the details, like let me specify ORCL PDB. Next, on which port, TCP IP, host name oracle.example.com. This is a we know that this is a host name oracle.example.com. Which port this database is on, 1521. I know it because I know the connection string, as we discussed in schema management in the previous session, and in the theory also you will be understanding this. And then next, and it's configured. You want to perform a test? Yes, perform a test. Select on that, change login details. So system and Oracle, I'm trying to connect and verify that it is connected or not. Test successful. So I have configured and verified that yes, it can connect to the database. So this service is configured, right? So done. So already exists. So back. Now we can cancel it because I already created the same thing and verified that. Same way, directory service, this is for if you have LDAP running. So this is a very good utility. Yeah, this is a very good utility to configure the listener. Then another command is lsnrctl. This is a utility. SLNR status. It will show you the listener status, what all listeners you have and what is the status of the listeners. Alright. So if you see, I specified listener status, the default listener status will be shown to you. Alright. and you see the listener. By default this is listener is the status. If you want to specify the listener name, here you can specify LSNR CTL status and listener name, right? I'll show you. So status of the listener, and you see the protocols and the database and instances where it is configured, right? If I try another one, listener status, listener 2, I think it was listener 2 for us. Yeah, this is listener 2, right? So we can specify the listener name also. In fact, it is that easy that you simply type listener and you start from here, attack prompt. So, and you want to understand the commands, you type help. You will see the commands. So start, stop, services, trace, spawn, status, reload, quit. These are the commands for command line utility for listener control. So ultimately this session is all about the listeners, management of the listeners, or the connection, where the connection is established, because we cannot talk about the connection without listeners. Where the log files are stored, look at the location of the log files. So this is session 11, configuring the Oracle network environment, and we are doing Oracle DB, Oracle 12c R2 release 2 or 12.2 as they call it. So the agenda of the session is Oracle Net Services, Listener Control Utility, Net Configuration Assistant, creating listeners, control the Oracle Net Listener, naming methods, use tnsping command to test the Oracle Net connectivity, connection pooling, identifying when to use shared server and when to use dedicated servers. We talked about the shared server and dedicated while we were installing, but what was the purpose, when to use which one, we forgot, we missed that. Therefore I'm including that. And communication between different databases, right? Connection different databases means the same location or different location, local or remote, really does not matter. Got my point? Means you have a database remotely located, you want to create a connection on the local, and you want to treat that employee table of some XYZ database on some host name to be as good as local table on the current database as employees table, because ultimately you just need a connection between the databases for that purpose, right? So this is the session, this is the agenda of the session. Quite interesting, quite easy session, nothing difficult, no complex at all. We are on the desktop, right? On the sitting on the client side. So client have application running and Oracle Net running, right? Application connect with Oracle Net, right? So application, this is a connection between application and Oracle Net. We call it as middle tier or client. Over the TCP IP, listener is listening to the incoming connections from the client side. Where this information is stored, where this Oracle Net information is stored, this is stored into Oracle Net configuration file. So from where the client will take, okay, where the listener is, where the details are, where should I reach, where should I connect. So we need to take the configuration from the Oracle Net configuration files which are on the client side. Using the configuration settings in the Oracle Net configuration files, the application try to connect over the TCP IP network to the database server. Okay, so on the database server we have same set of connection files, Oracle network connection files, and the database server have Oracle Net running, and there also we are listening on a given port. So here listener is listening, and here client is trying to reach out to the database through the listener. So the role of the listener, the session is about this listener. Alright. So Oracle Net Listener, we have Enterprise Manager Control, or we configure using NetCA the way we have discussed. This is old style, this is in Oracle 11. Right now we don't use it in Oracle 12c, but yes, we configure it using command line or using the utility, right, which will generate these files. Whatever we tried using the NetCA, it will create these files: listener.ora, sqlnet.ora. Alright, So these are the files under Oracle Home Network. Let us take a look at these files, what these files are. Very interestingly, what these files contains. Of course we will understand the details. We will see these files which are generated. I missed that during the demonstration. I should have shown that whatever we are doing, they are actually making changes into these files. So we'll look at these files also, right? Then listener and Oracle databases are registered with the listener, and that listener is listening on behalf of the databases for the incoming connections. Listener is configured in these files. So whatever utility we used, whether netca or lsnr-ctl, listener control, actually these utilities were making changes into listener.ora file. Got the point? Okay, and we need to understand the syntax, and that is the file. Whenever you have to connect, whenever you have connectivity related options or issues, for troubleshooting you need to verify first whether the listener is properly configured, it is running or not. If it is not, then you cannot establish connection. You cannot connect to your Oracle database. There is no question of working. So you need to understand the listener configuration files first. Fine. Establishing a network connections. To make a client or middle tier connection, Oracle Net requires the client to know the host where the listener is running, the port that the listener is monitoring, the protocol the listener is using, and name of the service the listener is handling. Very interesting. Which SID, which service it is handling. In other words, listener is just a ear. So where these ears are, to which database they are connected, on for which database, on behalf of which database they are working. You got my point? Listener is like a ears. Fine, right? Yeah, so far so good. Good. Establishing a connection. So the user tried to establish a connection, incoming connection request from the user, listener is listening. That's how the connection happens, and listener then, according to the service registered with the listener, hand over the control or create a session for the database. So user session, that's how the user process is running on the user side. User session is established, listener has done the job, and job of the listener is over. Now listener is sitting idle aside. Now the server process is created on the PGA, program global area. Remember, on the server I told you that every user has a dedicated memory area, and that is called program global area, and that is for the user. SGA is for system global area, PGA is for specific user. So there is a server process running on the database side, that is called that is running in the PGA. There is a user process on the client side on the system, and there is a session established between the PGA and the user process, means server process and the user processes. They are called user sessions. Listener job was to create the connection, to help in creating the session. Once the session is created, listener job is over, because the session is established. You got my point? Handshake is done, and now they are exchanging the information. Fine. Just like port number 80, it listens. Once the session is established, then it will be between application to application. The interaction happens between the applications then. Fine. That's how the user session is created. So tools for configuring and managing Oracle network, we have Oracle Net Configuration Assistant and command line. We have two utilities to configure this, and this is the command which I demonstrated, lsnr-ctl. When you simply type this, you get the prompt, you type help, you will see the command directly, start or stop or status or reload or quit. This is a very good utility, lsnr-ctl, from the command line. So the command, for example, lsnrctl, you can type the command also, like lsnrctl start, lsnrctl status, right? Similarly, lsnr, when you type lsnr simply, nothing, no command, then you get the prompt also, and on the prompt you type start or status, right? It is from the dollar prompt or from the lsnrctl prompt. Choice is yours. You can directly type it, just like MySQL. You can type after MySQL, you can type the command, or you can get the MySQL prompt also. Same way, if you remember FTP followed by command, or simply type FTP, you get the second level prompt, and there you start typing the commands. So this is second level prompt also comes. So lsnrctl is the second level prompt. If you don't type any command, you simply type lsnrctl followed by enter key, you will get this prompt, and this is what I demonstrated. So commands, you can type the command at lsnrctl prompt, or you can directly type the command at the dollar prompt itself along with the lsnrctl. So this is for application for clusterware. If you have cluster, multiple nodes running, then you can use, we have the utility called srvctl, server control, and then srvctl -h start listener, stop listener, start listener, listener name, because then you have multiple listeners on your clusterware. So you can specify the cluster name also, you can specify the listener name also. But if you try that in our setup, you will get this error, because we need to have clusterware stack and then try again, unable to retrieve clusterware home. That is the reason we are not able to configure it, and in our case we get this error because we don't have any clusterware running. And this is what I demonstrated: Oracle Net Configuration Assistant, listener configuration, add, right? These are the screenshots of my quick demonstration. You specify the listener name, you select the port, then you select the use the default port or the new port. Here you configure another listener, or you are done. You specify the listener. So once you are done, you can click on finish. Same way, naming methods, the second option after listener, naming methods, directory naming, NIS, external naming, local naming. I told you that I will discuss that. So immediately after this quick screenshots, I am going to talk about these directory namings also, or the naming methods. So local net service, this is what I demonstrated, verifying that registering the service with the listener. This is what the point was. So service name, and then the protocol and the port number, and this is what the port, where the port was registered, where the listener was registered, where the listener was listening on. So directly, because the listener was configured to monitor this port, by default is 1521. If you have to change it, you can change it, but of course we have to have a listener monitoring that port, because listener is just monitoring the port and hand over the control. So we are using the existing one, and this is how we are registering the service with the listener. Perform a test, I specified the test. You remember I specified the credentials, and test was successful, means I was able to establish the connection. Naming methods. Yeah, when it comes to naming methods, what it is referring to is how can you authenticate and connect. Simple, authenticate and connect. As you know, when we were working with Linux, you remember that we can authenticate using local file, we can authenticate using LDAP, we can authenticate using NIS server. There are many authentication methods were there, right? When we are talking about Oracle database, we have to keep in mind two things: not only the connection methods, but also the user credentials, where the user details are stored. So we have to keep in mind two things: where the connection details are and where the user database is, right? So this naming methods is for that purpose. So there are, OracleNet supports several methods for resolving connection information, which essentially include the network related information like the host name and the port number, and also the user credentials. Okay, the four methods are easy connect naming, which uses TCP/IP connection string, local naming, which uses a local configuration file, directory naming, which uses centralized LDAP compliant directory like Active Directory, also external naming like NIS server. Okay, so these are four methods to name. One by one we'll take a look. Easy connect, it is enabled by default. No client side configuration is required. You have to specify username, password, @host name, the port number, and the service name. Fine, the service name. Fine. So, and no configuration settings, no parameters is required on the client side for this purpose. Clear? So no configuration file required. This is easy connect, but there is no support for connect time failover, source routing, load balancing. Does not support any of these things. Okay, easy connect does not support that. Local naming is where we specify a configuration file where the details are stored. We have a Oracle Net configuration file where the rest of the details are stored, and require a client side name resolution file to resolve into the name. It's like your host name, like when you talk about Linux, we refer to etc host file, right, where we specify the host name and the IP addresses. So similarly, not same, similarly we have a client side name resolution file. You remember the resolution, name resolution, etc host is also called resolver. Remember, correlate the things and you will find it easy. It supports all Oracle Net protocols. It supports advanced connection options such as connect time failover, source routing, and load balancing. Fine. Then we have the directory naming. In the directory naming, that require LDAP directory with Oracle Net name resolution. So it requires two things. For user credentials, it require LDAP. For networking settings related to the host name and the URL and all that stuff, we require Oracle Net configuration file, right? Because user authentication we are doing through LDAP directory. Reachability to the database, Oracle database, you are doing through Oracle Net configuration. Fine. So these credentials will be searched from Oracle, this LDAP directory, and the host name and the other details will be fetched from this configuration file, and then you will be able to connect to the database. So it requires LDAP with the Oracle Net name resolution information loaded, such as Oracle Internet Directory or Microsoft Active Directory services. It supports all Oracle Net protocols and supports advanced connection options. Okay. External naming. In external naming, what you use is NIS server or distributed computing environment, DCE, or CDS. You use these services for external naming, right? Even that is supported. We are talking about connectivity from the client to the database. What all options are supported? Clear? So this connection, advanced connection options, we are talking about advanced connection options. So these were connect time failover, load balancing, and source routing. So Oracle Net supports these advanced options with local and directory naming. You notice that Easy Connect does not support this. Fine. Testing the connectivity. This is the command, like in Linux we use ping command. In databases we use tnsping command. Alright. So tnsping command is used to verify the connectivity between your database and your client. Means between you as a client to your database, whether you are able to connect to your database or not, whether it is reachable or not. You are not trying the authentication. We are not talking about authorization. We are just trying whether it is reachable or not. Is it port is blocked? Are you able to connect? Will you be able to connect? Right? Let's see that in actually how it works. So I'm just sharing my screen again, show you the tnsping command. Okay, so tnsping, then oracle dot example dot com colon 1521 slash orcl pdb. Fine, and see connection okay, and you see from where it has captured the details. Parameter file is this, the parameters are taken from sqlnet.org, right? It is using ease connect adapter to resolve the aliases, right? And you see the connection details. Even if you specify simply the name, you should get the connectivity, right? Okay, that's how we can verify the tnsping command. So tnsping is just to I missed the screen share, and you were saying I'm listening, but you are not seeing, right? What are you saying? You were seeing the screen. Okay, now no problem. Let me show you once again. This is the tnsping command. Okay, and I got this message just now. Let me show you once again. tnsping oracle.example.com 1521 slash orcl pdb, and you see this output from where the parameters it is taking from. It is taking parameters from this file. Fine, and you can simply specify only the name of the service also, right? And you still can see, yeah, where the details are. These are details are mentioned into sqlnet.org file under your Oracle home. This is your Oracle home. Under Oracle home, network slash network slash admin slash sqlnet.org, right? So what is there in this file? What is there in this file? Let's look at this. What is there in the file? It has got the names, directory path, TNS names, means take the details from the TNS names, and this is the URL. I mean, this is the is connect option, right? This is generated by, yes, 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 yes. User sessions. Whenever a user connect, there has to be a server process running for to handle that connect, to handle that session. So for in a dedicated server processes, dedicated server has a dedicated session, a separate session, a specific session, an isolated session for every user. For example, when I'm talking about users, this is user 1, so there we have a dedicated session for this user. User 2, we have a dedicated server process for this. We have a user 3 dedicated session for that, right? That is dedicated server processes, right? If you are using a shared server, then what? Then there is something unique that comes into picture, and that is called dispatcher. So what happens in that is we have multiple server processes running on the server side, alright, and we have multiple user sessions are expected. They want to connect to the database. We are talking about shared server that was dedicated. In shared server, the dispatcher comes into picture, and the dispatcher will assign which processor will be assigned to which user. Means this dispatcher will take one server processor at a time and will connect to the user. Same way, second process assigned to second user, third process assigned to third user, and now fourth user has to wait. Just this example, right? The fourth user has to wait. So dispatcher is dispatching these server processes to the corresponding user sessions. Fine. That is what happens in the shared server. As Oracle shared server, user session data is held into the SGA. Repeat, in shared server, user session data is held in the system global area SGA. Remember to consider shared server memory requirement when sizing the SGA. When you are using connection pooling in case of shared server, because shared server use connection pooling. How? Let's take example. The client application has been idle past the specified time and the incoming client requests a new connection. How it works? Assume that we have configured here maximum number of connection is configured to 255 on the database, right? This is idle client, not connecting, not working. This is active client, and total 255 clients exhausted, total 255 connections are exhausted. Fine. Now a new client approaches. So this new client connection is 256th connection into the server. So connection pooling will be turned on because we have idle client. Connection pooling is turned on so that this connection can be accepted by kicking this client out and taking this client in, because this client has been sitting idle. So pooling means shared, that okay, you are not using the connection, let me use it. You got my point? That is connection pooling. When not to use a shared server, certain type of database work must not be performed using shared server, like database administration, backup and recovery, batch processing and bulk load, database warehouse. These cannot be done, should not be done using a shared server. They should be done only in dedicated server. Now communication between databases, two different databases across two different hosts. Sending data or messages between sites require network configuration on both sides. You must configure network connectivity in tnsping and the database link. So there are two parts of the configuration. First, network connectivity. Second, database link. Fine. Okay. How to create the database link? This is the syntax. Create database link, remote global name, connect to user identified by password using connection string. We will see that with an example, simple example. Let's see that example. In TNS names we specify the network details. So in TNS names we specify these details like remote ORCL, address, protocol, host, port number, connect data, and the service name. Fine. We specify this in the tnsname.ora. Then on the SQL Plus, what we do? We connect to HR normally, and then this is the command which I was talking about the previous screen. Create database link. You give the name is remote. Connect to HR. On remote we are talking about. Connect to HR identified by HR using what? Using remote ORCL, which is specified here. Got it? Now this connection link is created. Now it is very simple. Select star from employee at remote, and that's how easy it is. Fine. Which configuration file are used to configure the listener? They are never conf file, so three are ruled out. TNS name is only networking, so you're right. When using a shared server process architecture, PGA is relocated into the SGA. True. And that's all for this session. Hope you enjoyed it.